Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session at Aspen Health. With me is the author, Amy Larocca, the author of How to Be Well. And you look at all sorts of things going on in the wellness community. I'm intrigued by how you wound up covering this. You have traditionally covered fashion.
I have, yeah. So I spent 20 years as a fashion editor at New York Magazine. I didn't only cover fashion, but that was definitely my main wheelhouse at the magazine. And a lot of what I looked at when I wrote about fashion at New York was, what did people want? What were people after? What were people interested in when they got dressed in the morning? What were they doing that was trying to elevate their lives? What were they trying to communicate when they got dressed? And I started to notice that not only were my fashion editor colleagues and friends talking less about clothes and talking more about wellness, but a lot of the wellness companies were selling wellness using a lot of the same techniques and language that they'd used for years to sell us handbags, dresses, lipstick. And I became intrigued by that. And then once I was reading in Elle magazine, a celebrity juicer, as I call her, Amanda Chantal Bacon, the founder of Moon Juice, explaining what she does in the morning and what she consumes. And it was drinking crushed pearls out of, very specific copper cups. And I hadn't heard of anything. And I realized that fashion was becoming much more democratic. And part of what I think people liked about fashion was it was very inaccessible. And that was a huge part of its allure. But fashion was becoming much more accessible.
So as you had Zara and...
Not even that. I mean, yes, that you could buy knockoffs of runway clothing that was pretty good and very widely accessible, but also you could live stream the Prada show from your basement as it was happening. So you could be in your sweatpants on the couch, having an ice pop and watching Prada as it happened in Milan. And that used to be something that only the most rarefied fashion editors could see. And then you wouldn't really get to know what happened until it came out months later in a magazine. And you wouldn't even be able to touch it until it came out months after that. And you wouldn't even be able to buy it unless you went to certain cities. Now you could have it delivered to your doorstep.
You could buy it on Amazon.
Who
buys Prada on Amazon?
Someone wherever they want. And
if I'm going to spend $5,000, I want them to be really nice to me. If I decide to spend $5,000 on a dress, I want to feel like a princess.
Yeah, no, you can deliver it to the door of your farm if you wanted. And so that was making fashion a lot less appealing, right? But then there was this lady in California with her crushed pearl dust in her copper cup. And I was like, oh, well, that's like the new Valentino or something. So I started getting more and more and more interested in this idea of wellness, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I started out dipping my toe in with a cover story for New York Magazine, and then I was like, oh, this is way bigger than that. And that's how I got interested in it. I realized that wellness was the new luxury good that everyone wanted, and that was really complicated and really messy.
And it encompasses so much,
yeah,
right? Because I guess we probably, in the spirit of wellness, should have started with everybody closing their eyes and breathing in and manifesting peace before we started having this discussion.
Yeah, I don't do that.
But that was sort of the beginning. I remember things that I saw, just sort of this idea of people saying, oh, I'm going to, to do yoga, going for a yoga retreat, meditation.
Meditating, mindfulness.
Mindfulness, that's a big one right now. But that's not where the money is.
No, and a lot of it just is about following the money, right? And I think that a lot of the beauty industry started responding to this new kind of hashtag feminism that was happening and saying, wait, if we just call all of this beauty wellness, it's kind of feminist. And we call it glow. We can sell even more stuff to more people. And, so it's just a lot of it was a sort of repackaging and repositioning of the beauty industry under this category called wellness. And that definitely was a boon to the wellness industry. What really complicated matters was when COVID happened and people started to say, wait a minute, treating healthcare in America like a luxury good is actually very, very, very dangerous. And you start hearing these words that started coming up in healthcare, boutique, concierge, and you realize that, yes, healthcare was being packaged and sold very much using the same techniques and language as the luxury sector. And when COVID happened, it was like the rapture, right? It was like those who had and believed in wellness were being delivered, and those who had no access were,
Were left to suffer.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find interesting is the role of communication. Name that always stuck with me looking at history back, 100 years ago was Amy Semple McPherson. Mm-hmm. So she was a faith healer, and she would have a tent revival, and she was able to spread her word on the radio. Yeah. And she would lay hands on someone, and they would say that they would be cured.
Like Oprah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's not a new thing.
No.
But somehow I feel like the whole influencer thing, in the sense that you were talking about, remember when a beauty brand would have Isabella Rossellini or some other actress as their spokesperson or the face of their brand. And now you get stars and influencers doing it themselves, bypassing Lancôme or Estee Lauder or whatever. Gwyneth Paltrow, she has her own brand.
Yeah, I think you can definitely have, the Hailey Bieber or the Selena Gomez. They have their own brands, and they can definitely move a tremendous amount of merchandise. But I think you can also have the revival tent model. I don't know if anyone here has been to a Goop conference, but the revival tent model is alive and well. I also was invited to an Oprah Winfrey, I guess it's a taping, she's now, streams live, and I had researched and written a lot about the revival tent model for the book, and yeah, it was a special gathering for women of menopausal age from the tri-state area, and I was there, and I had written a piece for the New York Times about the marketing of menopause, and she was having a conference on menopause, and so she invited me to come, and it was, I think, if there are any other women of menopausal age in the room, it was about the wonders of HRT. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's been a roller coaster about hormone replacement therapy. It was all bad, and now it's all good, right? That's to sum up the messaging that we're getting. Yeah. But I
even
think
in the medical
this is a very sophisticated audience here at this conference, so I think probably most of the people here understand that it's not that simple. But I think when you're in the revival tent, it's all that simple. So the story that day at the Oprah Winfrey show was, throw down your crutches, you just need HRT. And it was so fascinating to me to be in that room because my editor from the New York Times was calling me and saying, okay, tell me what happened. What do you want to write? What do you want to talk about? And I was like, I don't want to talk about anything for 72 hours. I just want to bask in the Oprah glow. It was so great. I had so much fun. I've never been seen before. Don't talk to me till it was Friday. I was like, I don't even want to talk to you till Tuesday. Just leave me alone. I have a new best friend, and her name is Oprah Winfrey. And but on Tuesday we'll talk. And so I spent the whole weekend being I don't know, do you think we should have Oprah or just Oprah, or Oprah and Kale over for dinner? And then, I got over it and I was like, no, it's bananas. It was a revival tent because she was saying you probably don't actually need antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs. You just need HRT. And it was this idea that there are these things that can cure you.
No.
And that's not the case. There are things that can help. HRT can definitely help some women with some symptoms for some time, and it's great in those circumstances. Can't do it forever. Can't do it for everyone. Can't do it for all symptoms all the time. It's complicated. You should talk to your doctor. Might help you, might not help your friend, might help with this, but not with that. So it's, that doesn't work in a tent. But I'm sorry, we're in a tent, and
we all talk about talking to our doctors, but to a certain extent, what about the fact that women often feel they haven't been heard by their doctors?
So yes, exactly. That's a huge problem. Is women often feel they're not wrong, right? Women are often not heard by their doctors, both in the act of listening and in the time that they get with their doctors, which I think on average in America is like 11 minutes a year or something. So when you're not heard by your doctor, someone who you see on Instagram, you see on television, you don't actually know, takes on a tremendous amount of authority. Someone who has the capacity to stand in for your doctor becomes very important to you. And whether that person has an education, whether that person knows what they're talking about,
But, we were talking about this earlier, and we are seeing this throughout the health system right now.
Well, right now, yeah, they've taken over, the inmates are running it.
Institutional health care. And
well,
they
I mean, at the moment,
feel that, the naturopath, and I'm not saying that I'm discounting the naturopath, because sometimes you don't want to be over medicalized, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe you don't need an antidepressant, you can find other ways to help yourself feel better, whether that is through exercise. That doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah.
But for some of us, maybe the medicalization of trying to feel better, trying to feel well, is not the answer. And I had problems with the shoulder, went to see the orthopedist, and so he said, well, we could operate. And I said, well, is there something I could do before operating?
Yeah.
Because I just thought, let's try something less invasive first. And it seems as though to me that the wellness movement helps sort of embrace that. But there's some senses where people go too far.
Well, something very interesting that someone I interviewed for the book said to me, she's a great journalist and writer named Maya Dusenberry, and she had terrible endometriosis. And she said, I really hate when people say that I've gone looking for alternatives, because I haven't gone looking for alternatives. I couldn't find a doctor to listen to me. And I couldn't find... She said, all I wanted was some mainstream medicine. So I think there's a huge part of wellness that is just women looking for solutions. And that is a really important part of what gets lumped under this gigantic umbrella that we call wellness. And it's a very, very real and very important aspect of the so-called wellness movement, which is that these undertreated and ignored segments of the population are looking not for alternative treatments, but just for some relief. Right. And they sort of seek each other out, saying, I'm not looking for an alternative, I'm looking for something. And if my doctor were treating me in a way where I felt heard or understood or just treated, I wouldn't have to go looking. So I think there is a part of the wellness movement that is that. And I think that's a very, very important part of it, certainly when you look at things like autoimmune disease or other conditions that simply affect minorities, women of color specifically. We were talking about that over lunch, sickle cell. Lots of different things. So I think that's one very important aspect of it. It's not always alternative. Sometimes it's just care.
Right.
And I think sometimes speaking to peers can be very important. And I think institutions have let a lot of people down very significantly. And certainly now that is...
We're in a time when there's a lot of change.
There's a lot of change, yeah.
But then I wonder about, you also talk about these concierge spas, ones that I'd never heard of, because obviously I don't run in those circles in New York. But these functional medicines, but also, I mean, they just must be incredibly expensive.
Incredibly expensive, yeah.
And what are people really getting from them? Do they think that they're getting healthier?
Yes. I think a lot of what people get is attention. I think a lot of what people get is status.
That I can pay $2,000 a month to go talk to.
Yeah. I think that there's always a sense of access, right? There's always a sense of a secret. There's always a sense of being let in on something that someone else doesn't have.
Elitism.
The elitism, yeah. So I think that is a tremendous part of what people get with some of these concierge and boutique practices. The idea behind functional medicine is a beautiful one. It's rarely practiced. I've rarely seen it implemented purely. The idea, of course, being that you should look at the whole person. You should seek cause rather than just treatment.
Which is what we all want.
Which is what everybody wants, right? And which is what I think a lot of doctors you talk to say they wish they had the time and the resources to do. Of course, part of it is if you pay a lot, you're giving the doctor the time and the resources to do that. Unfortunately, what you end up seeing at a lot of the practices is doctors pushing a lot of their own supplement lines. I mean, I never want to get an email from my doctor that says they're having a sale. Like what you do when you're signed up for a...
Really?
Yeah, they're like, come in, we're having a sale. And you're like, well, I'm not sick. Like, I guess I'll go. I feel okay, but it's on sale. Like, to go to the doctor.
About going to one.
Yeah, and like,
they asked you what you had for breakfast.
Yeah, they're like, what do you have for breakfast every day? And I'm like, I'm going to ace this portion. I have like kefir, and it comes from Hudson Valley. It's like in a glass bottle. It's like gorgeous. And they're like...
Happy cow.
Yeah, it's like very Hudson River School, like on the painting on the bottle. It's like no BPAs. And they're like, oh, dairy. And I'm like, yeah, but like fermented dairy, it's good. And they're like, no. And they tried to have me replace my breakfast with like their proprietary protein powder. And I was like, I thought we didn't do ultra-processed foods, and that looks super processed. And they're like, whatever, you should have this. and I was like, you know, there's this thing that happens where I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but I wrote a book about wellness because I'm a super expert in branding and status. And all you are doing is selling me your brand. And that is not what I want. And so that is, to me, at the heart of the wellness movement, that it's all branding. I'm sitting in this super fancy doctor's office. It's been done by this decorator. The office was in Vogue. And
literally in Vogue.
It was in Vogue magazine. And
not Architectural Digest?
No, I think they probably like shot for Architectural Digest, but they got Vogue. And it was like, had like... everything was like biophilic, and they had like kombucha on tap, and there was no scale. You didn't have to take your clothes off, and it was like super nice. And the doctors were all wearing like super cute outfits with like these like kind of lab coats, but not really. And we were like at a Saarinen table, and they're like, "Have this. You're gonna buy it from us. It's like $125. And by the way, do you want a B12 shot?" And I was like, I thought that was like in the 70s. And so it was super expensive. And then they were like, you have to go to get 14 vials of blood taken. You can do it at the Quest in your neighborhood. And I was like getting my blood taken, and the woman's like, yeah, my son's like in Iraq. And I was like, oh my God. Like, I don't think I have any diseases, but just take more blood. And I felt so bad. And
is it for epigenetic tests?
They tested me for like everything. Not because it's like you don't have to have a food allergy, but you could have like a food sensitivity.
Okay.
So that you can just be someone who goes to a restaurant and is like, I can't have all these things.
Right.
And but it was like just being a part of this whole thing. And then you'd have in your kitchen like the branded protein powder. But everything you learn is that you don't have processed foods. But like, to me,
processed.
this processed powder, I might as well have had like a Lunchable.
Not to mention that a lot of those vegan powders actually have a lot of arsenic.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't I have had like an Ensure? Like it's disgusting. I wanted to have food, and
But they were selling that.
And then, I was my daughter doesn't have a thyroid.
Know who go to those?
So my daughter,
do they feel like they're?
Yeah, they love the protein powder, or my daughter has no thyroid. She was an incredibly sick baby. She had a tumor. She had a 1-pound tumor when she was born. She was super hospitalized, and I was still working as a fashion editor at the time. The fashion editors, like, they love wellness, and so my daughter has taken Synthroid every single day of her life. She's 12 now. She's in great health now, but she still takes Synthroid every day. And I can't tell you how many parents have said, "I can't believe you give your daughter Synthroid." And
what should you give her instead? Some protein powder?
Desiccated goat liver, I think it is, that they suggest. And I'm like, well, that's not going to work. She doesn't have a thyroid. Like, she needs to take...
Right.
She does not have a thyroid. Like, there's not a gland in her body that produces thyroid hormone.
But obviously they know better than the doctors.
Yeah, and they're like, oh, it's just really dangerous. I would never give my child Synthroid. And I'm like, well, your child probably has a thyroid. And so they're very, very, very skeptical of, like, anything medical. Yeah. But what I find is that, like, if it's called wellness, they're branded as such or very obscure. They're very willing. There's a willingness to take anything branded wellness or anything branded
disbelief.
Absolutely suspend. It's like, yeah, suspend disbelief. Just take things that are branded or obscure or come from someone who is deemed has this sort of wellness imprimatur. So, like, why would I give my kid a desiccated goat anything? I would rather give my child a medication that has been researched by incredibly, like, intelligent scientists and doctors, but there is this suspension, as you say, suspension of disbelief. There's no skepticism, and everything kind of goes out the window, and it's this weird double standard when something is branded wellness, especially when it is branded or has, like, I wouldn't take a goop supplement. They list like 3 ingredients, but then they're saying, well, how dare it's just.
But they'll charge you $500.
They'll charge you a lot of money. So if it's very expensive, if it's beautifully packaged.
Speaking of the beauty part is, to me, the most fascinating part, and I will admit that I fall for it.
Oh, me too.
It comes in, it's in my Instagram. They know my demographic, and so maybe I'll try this new whatever hyaluronic treatment, something, just because it's self-care. It makes me feel better. And you talk a lot about that, about the glow. I find it so incredible to see, again, I'm not on TikTok, but I see how all these influencers, they put on so much makeup to look natural and glow. Yeah. It just seems like it's a really expensive process to look natural.
Yeah, and I really, it's very important to me that no one ever feel that they can't do something to take care of themselves and feel better. I think it's very important to understand where the line between doing something that makes you feel better and something that makes you feel worse is. So when does taking care of yourself make you feel better? And when does taking care of yourself start to feel like, I'm never going to live up to this, and it starts to make you feel bad? I think that's a very important distinction in wellness and in the beauty world.
I'm going to open it up to questions, so they're going to be bringing up the microphones. But one last thing I wanted to talk about. You talk a lot about with women.
Yeah.
But one of the things I've noticed is this whole glow. I think there's a bro glow thing going on.
Oh, yeah, that's more about living. That's about living forever.
Well, not just living forever, but looking good. I mean, we have wonderful folks who advertise on our network, and those infrared masks. There's a whole one that has a young man using them.
Yeah.
There's another one that has a young man's hyaluronic, moisturizing stuff, showing how if if you're 50 and you don't use it, this is what you look like. And, they put somebody who's like 75. And then, but if you do, you look like you're 28. And then the other one that they have is the shower. But the thing I think about in terms of the glower in chief is think about our commander-in-chief is very fond of bronzer. He likes to glow.
He loves bronzer, yeah.
Right? I mean, so it's a thing now. Men, you are also brought into the whole glow.
I think that's a lot to do with the image consciousness of social media, online dating. I think in terms of marketing, just identifying larger customer bases. Yeah, and I think men are definitely joining in. I also think with all of the longevity, if you're going to live forever, you got to start taking care of it, right? If you're going to...
You want to look good. You don't want to look like Methuselah.
I know, right? They're all death is going to be optional in the future, so they better, yeah.
All right, we have any questions? Right here on the...
Hi, I'm a medical student. I was curious how we can learn from the beauty institutions, the concierge medicine, to help women feel more heard in a medical practice, even if we don't have necessarily the same time or resources. But I was wondering if you noticed anything that made you feel heard that we could adopt in regular medical practice.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that some of the things that I think doctors in more standard practice could adopt are, just the practice of listening, number one, asking questions about, nutrition didn't used to be part of medical school, which is really fascinating. Lifestyle questions, which I think are really becoming, it's becoming much more standard. I mean, the College of Obstetrics and Gynecology used to meet at the Yale Club, and women weren't even allowed inside. So, and now you have majority of practicing OBGYNs in America are women. So I think there's been so much progress in terms of how different groups are being heard better. It's not even close to enough, but I think even asking the question that medical students are even asking these questions is a great demonstration of how, we're even thinking about, I just went to a session with the medical officer, or the scientific director of Eli Lilly, and he was just talking about how there's just such a different, listening to patients is just a huge part of how they think about developing drugs now, which is just a huge departure from, I think, how healthcare used to be thought about. Of course, time is always the question, and I know that doctors are very, very pressed for time. But I think really it's a question of listening when possible, which I know is difficult in a lot of circumstances.
All right, how about gentleman in the back?
In your travels and your reviews of looking at all these trendy things, have you identified any rising, trendy wellness things that actually are efficacious?
Yeah.
And secondly, is there the wire cutter for wellness that one can go to that is sort of can actually approve and demystify it for us?
So one thing I think has been really great is that there used to be that big emphasis that to be a successful person, you didn't sleep. If you would read any sort of interviews with a successful CEO, they would all say, I only sleep 3 hours a night, right? That was the sleep is for losers or whatever the sort of idea used to be. And there's this now an increased idea that in order to be a successful person, you need to prioritize rest and sleep and take care of yourself. And I think that the idea of sleep, I stopped that at the idea that sleep is now so as soon as sleep became as soon as people started to understand that rest and sleep are important to being healthy, immediately the idea that sleep could somehow be commodified. I mean, I'm pointing at my aura, pointing here with my aura ring. Yeah, and then having the perfect 8 thing. And so I think if you can understand that you should prioritize sleep and rest without then hopping on, Ariana Huffington once tried to sell me a $125 IKEA doll bed with a little blanket to tuck my phone in at night. You could also just plug it in like the kitchen or something. So like resist the urge to pay for your sleep, but probably also don't wear one of these because I'm always like, what was my score? Like try and not commodify your sleep, but understand that old idea of like the successful people only get 3 hours a night or whatever. But I think prioritizing your sleep. There's not a lot of people have tried to do the like, does this work? Does this not work? Will it harm me? I mean, don't get a colonic. Like, just common sense. I think one of the things that the wellness movement does is try and like make your body appear as a mystery to you and remove the idea of common sense. Like, well, I don't know. It seems kind of crazy to go have my like insides hosed out. Doesn't seem like a good idea, but they tell me it's like. Just to kind of clue in and know that if something doesn't feel necessary, it's probably not. And you could like be your own wire cutter, if that makes sense. Like, would I have food or would I have powder? Have food.
How about over here, the young woman in the purple?
Thank you so much for an incredibly interesting talk. What would be your marketing or branding guidance to academic medical centers where you have physician scientists and researchers that truly are the source of truth and have that foundation? How do you see that? How do you see them from a branding, communication perspective, combating or appropriately riding the wave of the tsunami that you're talking about?
That's such a great question. Like, how would you get people who actually know what they're talking about to combat like influencers? That is just an excellent question. There's a few really amazing doctors. Jen Gunter. We love Jen Gunter.
Tim Caulfield, who wrote a whole book about, goop and Gwyneth
Is Gwyneth Paltrow wrong about everything? Yeah. That's really a wonderful question. Because I know, it's sort of like what this gentleman over here was talking about is like, where's the wire cutter for this stuff? Where's the person who's going to tell me? And Jen Gunter is an amazing OBGYN who is like, you're not going to get breast cancer from an underwire bra and explains to you why. I would really, I don't know, let's talk. Yeah. Yes, I love that question. There are more doctors out there.
There are more
doctors
that are influencers. Joel Burvell, who was here last year, he has that ability because he's young and to be able to demystify things, and he really has a following. And I think, someone was asking me earlier saying, well, I'm trying to get this program for African Americans and things, and how do I get involved with media? And I was saying, actually, I think you're going to reach people better if you do non-traditional media, because that's where people feel more comfortable. They don't feel like they're being spoken down to. So if you can get within that realm where you're meeting people where they are, as opposed to telling them, you need to come here where we're going to speak down to you. Yeah. I think that's the point where we are at this point.
I agree.
With healthcare communication.
And it's like in all things, we're all combating this like celebrity culture and who we believe, right?
Except half these celebrities I've never heard of. This is when you know you're old, when you're like,
who?
That person's famous? I don't know who they are.
The who-lebrities.
There's a...
Follow up on that. I think what we need to do, you obviously use this to uncover, the bad, how the snake oil is. But we should not ignore that we need to move from sick care to health care.
Yes.
And we have to support that. I think the question that Karen asked, how do we get, people who really speak about accuracy? Mark Kaplan, your vision about the aspect of communication, that we need people who know what they're talking about to be out there. So we should look at this field and not only say, oh, it's a terrible, it's horrible idea. It's actually, there are good ideas in there, but the way they are being practiced is not correct.
I think that's exactly right.
We have to push for the accuracy and for the correctness. And the scientific wellness, the scientific health span.
I completely agree. And I think one of the things that was so complicated is like you'd be going along, and you'd be like, yes, I love this idea about functional medicine. Wait, why are you pushing this disgusting protein powder on me now? I loved everything you said until you stuck me with the B12 shot. Like, I was with you until you then pulled out this huge thing of supplements to sell me. So it's like when the capitalism comes in, you start being like, wait a second, so it's like, and there was something I struggled with a lot when I was writing this book was like, a lot of the ideas were so great. And of course we want to treat the whole person. And of course we want to be treating, we want prevention rather than just Band-Aid medicine. And all these ideas were great. And then it was like the capitalism just squashed it. It was like with the HRT, like, I'm so glad we're not just blanket saying this is dangerous, but it was like HRT was such a good example because I felt like it was like this perfect storm, right? Because I think we can all agree that COVID accelerated the adoption of telehealth, right? Like, people were so much, I think everyone in the industry would say that 15 years probably collapsed in terms of people's willingness to be treated online, right? Like, COVID just sped that right up.
Well,
so
it's been such an amazing thing for mental health treatment.
For mental health treatment, for a lot of different things, right?
For that, especially because taking time out, going to an office,
Sure.
getting off of work, being able to do it on a much more
Traveling
accessible
there,
way, not
yeah.
have to travel.
So there's all these benefits to that sort of time collapse that happened in terms of people's willingness to be treated online.
Oh.
What happened in terms of menopause care with the change in the recommendation around HRT was like you had all these venture capitalists being like, oh, race to treat menopause symptoms online. It used to be too disgusting to even say menopause out loud. People just like barfed,
but it was
right?
interesting.
And now suddenly you had the moment where people could talk about menopause, and you had this like telehealth moment, and it was like money just.
But do you
flew
also
in.
understand why menopause is now a business, right?
Yeah.
First, we went to fertility.
Yes.
To try to keep all your younger women.
And women were getting older,
and also, the spouses to be able to access those things. But think about, I did a story about a menopause business, and that story, the folks at NBC said, oh, we want that story.
Yeah.
And do you know why? Because a lot of the senior producers happen to be in my age
age
cohort. They're in menopause.
And it wasn't,
and they love the idea of this, that suddenly, finally, someone is listening to us.
And it wasn't just these men in positions of power saying, oh, yuck, we don't want that.
And that these had been backed by venture capitals. A lot of those capitalists were women who had backed this.
So suddenly,
it was a very exciting idea.
There's so much money in menopause, and suddenly, suddenly this business explodes. And again, to your point, okay, I'm so glad we're treating menopause, but we can't talk about it like we suddenly are just going to put every single woman on hormone replacement therapy. So it's like, again, it gets great, and then as soon as the money comes in, the whole model kind of explodes. I mean, that's a simplification, but you see where the model breaks down. Like, it's great, we're talking about it, and then it just sort of, it's the money, it's always the money.
Okay, we have some in front here. Let's start with the woman in the yellow, and then we'll go to the front row.
Hi, thank you so much for this conversation. My name is Tian, I'm a health fellow here, and I work at Futures Without Violence. And one of our priorities in the upcoming year is really engaging in some prevention strategy for young people, girls and boys particularly. And so as a mother of a 12-year-old, I'm curious what you would suggest would be effective strategies around public campaigns for girls and boys in this space, because I think middle school, as we all know, is the right sweet spot for proper messaging. So I'm curious, as you've been writing this book, where would you go for us to have the biggest impact?
Well, writing this book while parenting middle schoolers has been a real, middle school girls has been a real, I think that, I would burn down all the Sephoras. No, I would, I would say it's so hard. I would really, what I would start with is pushing for bans on social media for younger children. is what I see as one of the like.
I mean, being on social media at all?
Well, I know like in a lot of places around the world, they are banning social media for kids under certain ages. I know there's a big push for legislation in New York, where I come from, for kids under 15 or 16. I think a lot of the social media beauty and weight and that kind of influencing on girls in the like 10 to 14 age group is really, I find, very upsetting. So
It's not new. I mean, I remember reading 17 magazine and thinking,
it's
oh my
not
gosh.
new, and I had it in 17 magazine as well, and I went on some weird diet when I was 12 where I ate like a hot dog and a vanilla ice cream.
I remember being so proud of myself that I only ate an apple one day until
we all had it.
hemming my skirt, and I fainted.
Yeah, we all had it. The density, the amount, we all had it. It is nothing like the quantity that they get now. It's like looking at a magazine a couple times a day. Not that that was good, that was terrible.
So it's 1,000 times.
The volume. It's relentless. So I would definitely think about restricting social media is sort of where I would start.
But can you harness social media for good?
You can try. Look, they're always going to want
the algorithm going to defeat you?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, if you think about the fact that when you start learning how social media was developed to addict kids that age, it's like tobacco. I mean, it's the same thing. So I'd sort of, start there. I don't know. It's very difficult. I do think there are certain things this generation is smarter about and tougher about. The thing I feel like we fight against the most is what they are exposed to via social media. And it is, again, we had it all. It's the volume and it's the constancy. There's not really an escape from it.
Mm-hmm. Gentleman here in the plaid shirt.
I'd love to get your thoughts on the anti-aging movement.
Oh, yeah.
And, the idea, never die.
Oh, the never die stuff, yeah.
And I wonder if you could speak to sort of this tension, I think, between, the Aura Ring optimizing midlife and beyond, and does that somehow rob the grace of acceptance of aging?
Yeah,
the
for
wisdom
sure.
that comes with that journey.
I have so many thoughts on this. First of all, yes, it totally does. And I was saying to Bertha earlier, somebody sent me a meme lately, and I was so mad I hadn't thought of it myself. But it was some guy saying, look, you are not going to look younger. Like, that train has left the station. You can have a choice now. You can look old or you can look weird. And I was like, that's totally it. But I wish I could take credit for that, but I cannot. So yeah, I mean, one of the weirdest moments for me, and I was interviewing a man, and the men seemed to be really obsessed with the never dying stuff. It really seemed to be the men. The women seemed to be like, I want to look really good and then die. And then, but the men were like, I'm never going to die. I'm just like, death is going to be optional. I kept hearing that. And then
who can afford to live forever?
Who wants to live forever? I mean, it's like, did you not read Tuck Everlasting in school? Like, it's not fun. It doesn't go well. And I'm like interviewing this guy, Dave Asprey, who I'm sure a lot of people know who he is, the bulletproof coffee guy. And he's like snorting nicotine, and he's like all like, and he's like, yeah, I might want to have kids again in my 80s. And like with my wife, like with the wife I have. And I'm like, okay, well then if like with your, like who's going to carry them? He's like, maybe me. And I'm like, okay, like, I think that like my understanding of this biohacking, like never dying thing, and then there's like, there's sort of two ideas about how you could never die. And it's, my friend, Tad Friend wrote about this in the New Yorker, and he describes them as the meat puppets and the robots. And like the meat puppets like keep their body going, and then the robots like put their consciousness in the cloud, and then that cloud goes into like a robot. So like Martine Rothblatt has like, she's on Bina 4, so she's like made a robot of her wife so that she's got like the consciousness in the cloud, and she's up to 4 that she can put her wife's consciousness in because she really never wants to lose her wife. So she's got like an AI clone of her wife in the cloud. So like if you want the meat puppet version of you, okay, you're going to look rough, I would have thought. I mean, clearly Dave Asprey wants the meat puppet version. I mean, I think they really believe, like, what I have come to understand about the biohacking and the living forever is, like, in a weird way, the robot version is kind of makes more sense. I don't know. I mean, making sense is relative, but like, I can understand the idea of replicating your consciousness and then creating some sort of avatar to live on Earth with your consciousness. I can see how you get there. The meat puppet version, like, whoa. I don't even know what that is, but I can see how you get from the idea that, like, if you are a very successful kind of systems hacker, that how complicated could the body be? If you've changed society with your, as much as you have, and you can understand systems to the extent that you do, that you've changed the world, how hard could one body be to hack? I understand logically how you get there. I don't understand on a human level how you don't understand that it's also impossible. But I understand that there's a lot of people who've come to think that way.
Do you feel, when I look at something like that, and I see these people who want to live forever, I wonder about, what is the meaningfulness of your life?
Well, that's the other thing. So one of the things I also encountered a lot is that aging is discussed and described often in wellness conversations as a disease. And to me, that's a problem. To me, it seems very wrong to think of aging as a disease. There are diseases that you can get as you age, but aging itself, I think we should stop thinking of aging as a disease. I know there's a lot of people in the wellness and longevity movements who disagree and who think that aging itself is a disease. So, I don't know. I think, like, look, you can look older, you can look weird. So, I'm going with old, but a lot of people don't.
Overall, as we wrap up, what have you learned and what have you taken away about your own value system in terms of how you feel about wellness, your health span, and yourself?
I mean, I think, like, for me, a lot of this has to do with a lot of what I have experienced has to do with, like, being a woman, being a mother, mothering daughters has been a lot of what I've come to think about in writing this book and thinking about these topics. So much of it is wrapped up in what is expected of women in terms of appearance, in terms of taking care of our families, in terms of taking care of both our children and our parents, and how much pressure is put on women to handle these things sort of gracefully and without the appearance of an effort, whilst paddling below the surface. And I think for me, what I've realized is I would like it to be easier for my daughters. I would like legitimate concerns to be treated more legitimately and superficial concerns to be treated more lightly. And I sometimes think that balance is very, very, very skewed.
Well, and hard to find.
And harder to find, yeah.
It's like, I think finding the right having that relationship with your doctor is like finding a love match, really.
That's right.
To find
Absolutely. Finding the right doctor
really,
and
who gets you.
So I think, like, with all the time and money and effort we put into how we look and how much money we spend on how we look and what a mess our healthcare system is, I mean, that stew is what you get when That's wellness.
And I guess, as the great Fernando Lanzmas used to say, better to look good than to feel good. If you're not going to feel good, you might as well look marvelous, darling. So thank you so much for this great conversation.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
And I just want to remind everyone that Amy will be signing her book, so if you have it or if you want one, you can get one later. I think it's at the Pepke tent, right?
It's
someplace close.
It's in one of these places.
And don't forget as well, in your bag there is a $10 coupon.
Oh yeah.
That will also allow you to
get
a little deal.
Yeah.
Yes, so you can pick it up there, and then she can.
And this afternoon, I think at 5:15.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
and thank
you
all
so
of you
much.
for those great questions.